Okay, let's dive into this video. Ooh, commentary video. Alright, today class we're going to be learning about how to load a kiln, all the different components that you're going to need to load that kiln, so let's just dive into it. Now, this is the old intro that I have. This is going to be a lot more like a commentary reel and seeing what I was talking about. Again, I'm redoing the audio because the audio was just horrific in this original video. It's in the playlist, so if you want to go back and watch it, good luck. Hopefully it's a little better than what I had. So, going over stuff for the kiln. First things first, kiln shelves, cones, stilts. I got a nice firing chart. Got that from one of my trips to NAEA. Great place if you got a minute to go. So going over the things of a kiln that you need to know today in this class. Really deep diving into how to use stilts, how to line things up properly, how to set up your kiln shelves, the stilts, how to load it without any issue, because you know what, sometimes they don't teach you that stuff in college and you need to learn how to do it. First off, this kiln shelf, it's like 50 pounds, it weighs a ton. Make sure that your back can handle loading the kiln first off, because it's heavy. I'll give you some great tips on how to load a kiln in a minute. So one thing about the kiln shelves, they come in different sizes. The octagon is kind of a common one now, but I've had the half moons and the planks, the ones that look like long rectangle pieces. The thing with a kiln shelf, it should be nice, thick, and durable. You want those inch thick ones, and it's just because of durability and long-lasting longevity. They won't warp on you because it's a lot thicker. It just works a lot better overall. Some of the rectangular ones I've used over time, they're thinner. They're like an inch thick. They're like half an inch thick, and they do warp over time. So just a little FYI tip. Now, when they come out of the kiln, when they come out of the factory, they're creamy on ones on both sides. That creamy side is the raw clay itself. Kiln wash is what you see on mine, the white. I buy that stuff in bulk. Get several bags of it. Get the biggest bag you possibly can. You will not regret it. You'll always need it. So what you do is you paint the kiln the kiln wash on there raw, and you can fire directly, do a bisque firing directly on that without any issue. I would recommend firing it before putting a glaze firing on top of it, just because you don't want to have the chemicals that are in the kiln wash to accidentally mix with some of the glaze components. There's a whole atmosphere thing. That's another video. Watch like me explain about glazes. I kind of go over some of it there. Now, the kiln wash itself, you want a nice thick coating on there. The reason you want that thick coating is so that durability, longevity of the kiln shelf itself is dependent upon that kiln wash. Some people don't fire with it. I think that they're crazy, personally, but it's an insurance policy, and that's the reason why we have it in there. So reason that you have it in there is if during the type of a firing you have some glaze, the glaze drips, it falls on the kiln shelf itself, that piece you can pop off, you'll have that slag, that bit of glaze still left behind. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that the kiln wash is nice and thick so that you can take a chisel, you can chip off that other piece of glaze, and it works out just fine. Everything kind of comes back, but you will have those little bits of divots. So using a little bit of kiln wash to fill in those divots so that you are covered by anything like that little bit of clay that's been, the residue that's been baked off, kicked off, then you can take care of it without any issue. But you load that stuff on there and be liberal with it. All right, so let's go over kiln stilts. All right, so stilts, you have three basic sizes. You have wee bit bigger, and freaking huge. That you can see me using in this video. And the reason that we're doing with the different sizes is because you will need different sizes for different pieces that you guys are doing. The foremost one is having enough for, if you were loading just the kiln of one size, that one size will cover everything and you're good to go. But I do recommend at least 2 or 3 different sizes so that you can vary the amount of wares that you're loading into that kiln. Now, as I've got in here, you got circle ones, square ones, triangle ones. They're all the same. They all do the same thing. They just hold the kiln shelves apart. That's the number one thing. So while you're doing that, you want to another thing is in the wedge. The wedge is a refractory brick that is used. It's what they do is they take clay, sawdust, mix it together, and then use that to make the refractory brick. And we use the kiln wedge to vent out our atmosphere. And you're doing that during the candling phase. The candling phase is what you do is the pre-bake. I think I have one where I talk about loading a kiln. You got to really wear in a kiln. It's leather hard, some of it might even be fresh, and you need to quickly dry it out. So putting the wedge in there creates that little bit of space inside the kiln so that you can vent out the atmosphere, because you want all that moisture to leave the kiln itself and vent out without being the moisture being trapped inside of it. Moisture will deteriorate the age of the kiln, so if you are doing this, I've done it where you leave the lid open on low overnight. It's fine. It gets up to about 100 degrees. It's all good to go. But the wedge is an imperative thing. You want to have it in there. The wedge just makes sure that you can vent out those atmospheres without any major issue whatsoever in the kiln itself. You just want to make sure that you can get a cohesive atmosphere, vent it out, and your stuff is good to go. I'm still talking about the wedges still, but I'm getting through it. After that, we have the little road cones. Road cones are your vent plugs. The vent plugs are very important to have because the vent plugs are so that you can check and maintain certain atmospheres or certain temperature regulatory things inside the kiln. You need at least 3. Usually there's 3 vent holes on the side of the kiln. I keep my top one plugged, usually 24/7. Reason being is because my handle is on my kiln, the heat that's coming out of that hole varies between 7 to 900 degrees because you're firing inside that kiln. That heat is escaping from somewhere. You could light stuff on fire, so make sure that you have nothing around your kiln. There's a fire tip. Now, using a glaze firing, I will plug all of them just to create a more confined firing solution so that all my stuff fires a lot faster, fires more evenly. For a bisque and most of the firings that I do, I keep the top one plugged so that the heat escapes at a certain rate so that I can, one, make sure that the handle to my kiln doesn't continue to just incinerate and burn off. That's the number one reason that the plugs are in there. For bisque, you don't need the kiln. You don't need the kiln plugs. If you're doing low fires only, you really don't need the kiln plugs. But again, it's for the handle for my sake. And now, if you're doing anything above a low firing, vent plugs are kind of an essential. You can fire a high fire without vent plugs in, but it just takes forever. That's the big thing. After that, kiln, the stilts. These things are imperative for elementary schools. I do want to stress that to you guys because students like to paint all of their piece instead of leaving that base bare coat. You want that. I've got 2 pieces in front of me. I got a vase and a cup. The vase is relatively clean base, and that is what you want to have. You want to have the clean bottoms. You can do a whole thing and clean the dirty bottoms if you want to. I have. It's funny. The kids remember it, and that's one of those nice little tips to learn by. But if you have a little bit of glaze on the bottom there, and you can see that little white bit, that is a bit of the kiln, the kiln wash that's flaked off onto it. You can use a Dremel tool. You can use a sander, and it comes right off. If you sand underwater, that is a health thing. You don't want to breathe that dust. It's not good for you. Just a little tip. But then the other here, the cup is completely coated. It is an underglaze that they did on here, so technically it won't stick. But you know what? I'm cautious and I'm going to be a little paranoid. I put a stilt down there and I'll fire it on the stilt. Now, the thing with the little cup there, fits right on the stilt. No issue whatsoever. Does that work all the time? No. So get lots of stilts. Make a little mesh bridge out of them on the kiln shelf, and you can load your ware on there, make a little pattern, whatever, and set stuff up. So then those things can be fired off. These stilts, you can buy a box of them. There's like 20 or 30 in there. I think it's like $20. So I mean, there is a cost, but it's easier if you have to throw away a stilt than to throw away the shelf itself, or the shelf becomes damaged beyond repair. That is a bigger issue for me. I keep mine in a bowl next to the kiln. It's easy for me to grab. Notice how I keep all my stilts in sets, either sets of 3, 6, 8 in some cases. Over there, the big ones. And the reason that we do that is so that it's easier to keep up with everything. Alumina hydrate. All right, let's go and talk about this real quick. Alumina hydrate is a chemical that does not burn until 3,000 degrees. It is an imperative thing to have for the kiln. I use it all the time. The reason that I have it, that I use it, is because it is an insurance policy that I can't get anywhere else. When you're buying glazes, wherever you're buying clay from, see if they have a chemical page. If they have a chemical page, you're looking up that one chemical, alumina hydrate. You need like a pound. That's it. And that 1 pound will last you like 10 years unless you're using it all the time and then you use it up. What I've used mine for in the past, and this is what what I'm talking about, is the kiln wash itself. A large component of kiln wash is alumina hydrate because it won't burn. But they put other binders with it, so it makes a nice sheet on top of your kiln shelf itself. But what I've done in the past is these stilts that I've inherited because I'm another teacher coming into this school. Some of these things are not balanced, and if they're not balanced, this stuff works as a insurance policy to make sure that all of your stuff works out well. You take a little bit of what we called sausages in college. You take a little bit of clay, roll it into a snake, roll it into a sausage, and then roll it in the alumina hydrate, and use that sausage that you made. You can either put it on the bottom, put it on the kiln shelf, put the stilt on there, or put it on the top of the kiln stilt, and then put it on, and then put the shelf on top, and it works to level things out. After the firing comes out, you take the kiln, you're taking the shelves out, you take out that stilt, you take that little sausage piece, toss in the trash can. It's burnt, but you have nothing stuck to each other. Everything is balanced right. Everything works. There's no issue. There's no that. It's just an insurance policy to have. That's good to keep in your back pocket. All right, let's get into loading the kiln now. So loading the kiln, we have our big, heavy boards, the kiln shelves here. You want to make sure that hang on, let me figure out what I'm saying. Number one tip: when you're loading a kiln, you have one set of shelves that permanently stay on the bottom of that kiln. Reason being is because that's an insurance policy to make sure that your stuff doesn't, damage the bottom of the kiln. So that bottom set that I keep in there, kiln wash the daisies out of it. It is covered. I've got like the thickest coat on that bottom shelf. Why? Because it's way down in the kiln, and sometimes that stuff's even hard for me to reach, so I just never touch it, and it stays in there. It's great. It's just my happy little insurance policy. Also, the kiln's shells themselves are that nice, thick, strong kiln brick, not a refractory brick. They are two different things. That kiln brick is nice, thick, sturdy, heavy stuff. The refractory brick, which is what your entire kiln is made out of, holds heat exceptionally well, but it is super fragile. I've had this where we had a class where we were passing the bricks around, and we were just pushing it between two people, and we were just holding that brick, and the other person grabbed it. Whole thing broke in half. My professor, the look on his face was like, "Oh no, how much does this cost?" He's like, "It's like $2, but still, I need you guys to see that this stuff's going to break." And it was a good learning experience, but I don't recommend that you learn from it because your kiln is broken. So you can buy kiln bricks, put those underneath, and then put one sheet, one large. You can get one of those big base level coat kiln shells that just stays in there. And that's what those are for. It's to level out the bottom. Never load directly on the bottom of the kiln. That's just the thing that I want to impress everybody. Now, once you start to get into loading the kiln, you want to make sure that everything is nice and level. The one thing I'm going to reiterate probably 1,000 times is stability. Make sure that your entire loading of the kiln, everything is stable. You want stability to be the number one factor of the whole process. So as I said, starting off on the table here, you can see that we've got two kiln shelves that I've got. They're two pieces butted up right on each other. The seam is almost invisible. I mean, you can see the seam. I know you can see the seam, but you want those things touching 100%, not like one side is slightly off. You want them like butted up against each other. Now, when I'm loading on the stilts themselves, the first load that you do is the shortest stilts that you can use inside this kiln. So here I've got, I think it's like a 3-incher stilt. Loading those stilts, I put them at the 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and 9 o'clock faces on a clock. Reason being is so that everything is balanced out, everything is nice and even. So once you have those kiln stilts in there like that, you're going to start loading in your shelves. Now, when I'm talking here, I'm telling you, put all of the weight into your toes. As you lean up on your toes and you're bouncing, you're pirouetting, so the deep breath in like a ballet, like a ballerina, and then you're loading in the kiln shelf so that all that weight is pushing through my toes. I'm using all that weight difference so that I can load them in there easier. Now you can shift the shelves on there however you fit, as long as everything's balanced, everything works out. That might be a better stability solution for you. Me, I always keep mine nice and symmetrical. This half is this way, this half is this way, and it never changes. That's just the way that I was taught, and it's the way I fire, and it's the way I show you. But it's all about stability. We are versatile here. So loading on that second shelf, Again, make sure those seams are butted up to each other. You are, again, making sure that everything has perfect contact so that everything is stable, and that stability, again, is key. I've said this stability word like 12 times at this point, and there's a reason, because that's like the number one thing I want you guys to take away from this. All right, so then again, loading the stilts, same formation every single time. Even if you're changing the way that the line is in the middle, make sure that all your stilts line up the same way. So moving on to the big boys on one side, I'm using the medium ones on the other. You can totally do that. There's no issue whatsoever. The big thing is kind of making sure that as you're lining it up, you want to ensure that everything is balanced according to your kiln. The shelf always lines up on the same stilts so that that whole weight structure is centralized to the way that it's being stacked. If you can afford by having that one shelf kind of come in a little bit to where that top shelf, they're kind of overstacked a little bit like this, but the stilt that's holding up that other shelf, it's butted up and it's causing that stability. Good insurance policy. That's something to think about. But as you're going up, if you've got multiple layers and you're having to butt things up, make sure that they're not going to crash at the top. So take that into consideration too. Now, you can set stilts in there however you need to. If you need to do that one in the middle, one out on the outside, that's fine. Me, I always put them on the outside because that's the way that we load kilns. You're going to have that more space in the middle to put wear than you are a stilt to sit there for balance. Well, now, while I'm loading on the top of the kiln setter, that's that big column that's on the outside of the kiln, I'll put an extra cone out there. Reason being is so that I can measure all my wear before I put it in the kiln. It's just an insurance policy. So you keep that stilt up on the outside so you can measure your wear, make sure everything comes at that right height. You don't want to accidentally put something in there and then you put the next shelf on and it crushes the piece underneath it. That has happened, not to me, but when I was teaching this to my art ed class, they were like, "Why can't?" I was like, "There's a reason." And then one of them broke their piece. I'm like, "This is the reason why you do it this way." Now, you can stack stilts together. You can stack them one on top of another. As long as they balance and you have that stability, you're fine. There's no issue with that. The number one thing that we got to remind you is stability. So I never do it. I always try and plan any project that I do. I plan the project to the kiln stilt that I want to use for that load. The reason being is because I don't want to have an issue where I have a piece that's bigger than the stilt itself. Now, I do have smaller classes to where that's not really an issue in some cases, but for specifically elementary students, you want to make sure that you can get all those firings done in one go. Make sure that your pieces are going to be the right size for that stilt. Unless you have that one student who wants to do the super massive piece, you can make an allocation. But again, trying to keep up with 400, 500 different pieces, trying to make your life easier here. So loading those kilns in there, loading the wear in there with the different shelves, you're trying to make sure, again, everything is balanced, everything is stable, and everything lines up exactly the same vertical structure always. Now, going into the unload feature, exact same, just the opposite. But I do want to go over the way that we stack our shelves because this is where you might run into some issues. Now, when I'm unloading a kiln, I want to make sure that all of my pieces, all of my wear is, I set them off in different locations. I have all these different trays I'll unload all the wear into. But what we're doing here is we're going to stack the shelves in a certain way. Now, my kiln, the thing of the chair is the wall of the kiln room. Some people have these racks where you can make them out of PVC. I've seen them. It's like you take a bar at the bottom and it's got these different divider pieces so you can set each shelf in there divided wise. I'm cheap. I don't have that. So when I'm loading my shelves against the wall, again, put them at an angle so they don't fall over, and I'm staggering them back and forth across the entire space. The reason that we want to stagger that stack is so that we can make sure that you're not putting in undue stress on one shelf versus another. If I stacked them all on top of each other, I'm putting a lot more stress on that first one that I've put up against the wall, and I don't want it to chip. I don't want it to just become over encumbered over time, and it does crack, and that I've seen it happen. So putting them off center a little bit causes the pressure, the weight distribution to fall differently, and it works a lot better for the overall of the piece. Now, again, as I said before, you see how I've got stacks over here. Again, that's all for keeping the kiln room running as efficiently as I possibly can. I keep my kiln, all my stilts in the same stack section where all my triangle stilts are in one section, all my circle stilts are in another section, my square stilts are in another section, and they're all grouped in 6s and 8s. Some of them, threes and 6s, or 4s and 8s, depending on how many of those stilts that I have. And again, the small bowl that I have with the plugs and with the stilts themselves. So, as always, hope you guys got some good knowledge out of this review. Hope the commentary track was good and it made sense for what I was saying. Let's go ahead and take care of our basics, which is don't forget to like, subscribe, share on all the various platforms. Get that message out there. Don't forget, if you have a question, comment, concern, raise a hand in the comments below. Happy to answer those questions for my classmates. Stay safe. Keep learning. I'll catch you guys next class. Until then, later, guys. All right, we're gonna try this once more without the headphones and just see if I can follow. I feel like Scorsese. This is the second one I've done. This is a lot of talking. I don't talk this much. Okay, side note, did you guys dig this? If so, let me know, because I can do this with more stuff, and this will make filming a lot easier for me for a minute. But yeah, we'll go over some stuff in the future if you guys need me to rehash some information on an older video. Happy to do that.